Okay, well, I think we'll get started, and hopefully, if anybody else drops in, we can get them streamlined in here. So, thank you so much, everyone, for coming in. I just keep seeing the participant number like go up and up and up. Um, but I was sort of hopeful that this would be a pretty well attended session because that way, if we go out into some breakout rooms, there'll be a lot of people to kind of work together. So this is teach students to ask their own questions. This is a process that I learned a couple of years ago and I have been using in my own classroom, and it has been very, very successful. I absolutely love it. My students really love it. I get a lot of comments from them that they feel like they learn more using this. Um, it's very student directed as opposed to teacher directed. It allows them to kind of rekindle their curiosity and learning, which is huge. It's become an even bigger deal for me as I have a 7-year-old, and I watch how much wonder she has in learning. And then I think about my high school senior or juniors and sophomores, and so many of them have kind of lost that wonder. And so this is a way to kind of rekindle that spark and that love of learning for them. So I hope you find it valuable. And I'm going to actually have you go through the same process that I would do with students, albeit to a little bit of a briefer amount of time. When I do the process with them for the first time, it takes a pretty extended period of time. But then once we've done it, they learn it pretty quickly. And then I just sort of have to run the timer and remind them of what each next step is. All right, so I didn't introduce myself yet. Hi, my name is Kimberly Wigglesworth, and I am a high school social studies teacher in Onaway. If you are familiar with the Mitt of Michigan, I am up in the index finger, so the northeast tip. I've been teaching there for this is actually my 23rd year. I'm a graduate of that high school, so definitely a hometown girl. I'm also a self-proclaimed tech geek. I love everything gadgety, everything technology. I like to get into all of the new nerdy stuff. So, um, and I am at Mrs. Riggs on Twitter. I'm also on Instagram, although I don't use my Instagram as much professionally as maybe I should, but pretty active on Twitter though. All right, so this process, it's called the question formulation technique, and there'll be a little bit more information. It comes from a group called the Right Question Institute. There's actually a book that's available for this, which I realize I should have probably had the book. I could have showed you, but quick Amazon search, you'll be able to find the book. So it's a multi-step process, and you would work through this with students, and definitely it's going to be something that is scaffolded for them when you first do it. And the first several times you do it, you're really going to have to kind of hold their hands a little bit. For me, I have sophomores during the winter semester. Then I have those same students as juniors in the fall semester. And so that works really, really well for me. I spend some time at the beginning of that semester with the sophomores and kind of teach it to them. We use it all the way through our semester. Of course, they have their summer break. We come back. I usually have to kind of remind them a little bit how to do it. But then it really takes off for them. And by the time they get to the end of that second semester in my classroom as civic students, they are really, really good at going through this process. So the first thing that you need to do is come up with a question focus or the Q focus. And I'll talk more about this actually all the way at the end, because really when you go through this, you're going to almost reverse engineer it with a little bit of a purpose. So I want to go through the process with you first before we talk about how you determine what your Q focus is going to be, because you'll have some better understanding after you've done the process of why you have to be so specific with it. Oh, I can't push that button to advance. So this is going to be our Q focus for the night. Asking questions is the single most essential skill for learning. So the single most. So this is where, it's going to get interesting, I think. is that you're going to need to sort of think about what single most means and what single most essential skill means. And so we'll come back to this. It'll be on another couple of slides. And then when we go into the breakouts, you'll have access to it as well, so that you are able to have it to refer back to. So the second step in the QFT is the rules for producing the questions. And so, we always have to have rules. And when you first throw this out there at students and tell them, we're going to have rules, you get the regular groans, but the rules are very simple and there are not very many, which helps them a lot. First rule, ask as many questions as you can. You all have this student in your classroom. I am sure that you do. The student that reads rule number 1 and is like, yes, because they're the kid that's going to do this anyway. They're going to ask you 100,000 questions. And these questions might not have anything to do with anything. I have those kids. I think about that. I have one in particular I'm thinking of that I have in my room right now. And daily I'm like, you got to stop. You got to stop. You have to stop. I have to teach. We have so much we have to get through. But this gives students the license to be able to ask questions. And although we always say in our classroom, whenever you have a question, please ask a question. By the time students get to high school, especially, but even for a lot of them, by the time that they get to middle school, they may not necessarily want to ask that question anymore. I hear a lot from students about somebody being a try-hard, which just, it cuts me deep because I was a try-hard in school and I like try-hards. I want you to try hard. So it sort of frees students up. And at the beginning, this is going to be one of the tougher things, is really convincing them, ask questions. The more questions you ask, the better. This one is also really important because you probably also have those students in your classroom that might want to ask questions, but they're afraid that someone's going to tell them, that's a stupid question. Why did you even come up with that? And it's also going to shut down that kid that would say, that's a stupid question. All the questions have value. You are not supposed to stop. It creates this really safe space to protect students from that, those kind of negative peer interactions that we know they already have too much of. So, you don't stop. You have a very short amount of time. You need to get as many questions out as you possibly can. Rule number 3, write down every question exactly as it is stated. This is tough. And you really do, when you split students into groups, have to tell them, pick your recorder, pick your scribe wisely, because you want someone who can write or type. I feel that writing is better, like handwriting them is actually better. But obviously many of us are not in a situation where you could group kids up and they could write down right now. If you want all of the students to be able to see that and they're in a Zoom room, in a breakout room, they're going to need to be able to collaborate on that electronically in some way. So you are going to need to have kids be able to type them down. I feel like the writing is a more organic process. So the reason why you want to write all of them down and write them down exactly as they were stated is that really levels the playing field. And sometimes there are certain phrasing or word choice. You don't want to go away from that. Eventually you might change the wording of some of these questions, but at first you want that kind of gut, what they've thrown out there. You want that down on paper, or you want that on the screen, because that's going to help them get to the next steps. And then rule number 4, which is the last rule, change any statements into a question. So oftentimes when you give students the Q focus, they're going to make a statement about it. I think such and such. Okay, well, you can't write I think such and such. You have to write why such and such, or how such and such, or what such and such. And it really, that sort of gets them to have discipline in phrasing their thoughts as a question, in thinking in questions, and being able to ask questions in the proper wording. And we don't realize how often we intend a question and it comes out as a statement. I'm not really sure why that is, but it is something that I think definitely is out there for people, that we don't want to ask questions. We want to make statements. We want to be more sure of ourselves. Questions. I think there's a certain amount of kind of rawness about a question because you're really putting out there that you don't know something, and we don't always want to do that. That makes people nervous, I think. So at this step, then you can sort of throw this out to students with these two questions. So, what do you think would be difficult about following the rules, or which of them do you think would be the most difficult to follow? So, depending on your students, you might want to ask both questions. You may only want to ask one. When they get to be pretty well versed in this process, you may not have to use these questions anymore, but it's nice to throw them in there periodically, just to sort of bring students back to center, to remember what it is that they're going to be doing. Um, and to really get them to think about, okay, which of these rules is really going to be tough for me today, and to be mindful of that so that they can move into the process. So that brings us to step 3, and step 3 is finally where you are actually going to be having your students do something. And so in this case, I am going to be having all of you do something. So I'm going to divide you up into some breakout rooms. If you look in the chat, I'm going to put a link in there. That link should take you out to a Google Jamboard. And if you're not familiar with Jamboard, it's a great collaborative space that you can use with students. And it works really good if you're hybrid, if you're half face-to-face, half virtual, if you're fully virtual. Anyway, it can allow students to, in real time, kind of collaborate with one another, almost like it's very much like kind of a virtual whiteboard. So I'm going to send you out into breakout rooms, and there'll be the same number of breakout rooms that there are the Jamboard. So, you can determine, and then just, your group can claim one of the pages in the Jamboard and go from there. So let me click over to that just really quickly for anybody who maybe isn't familiar with it, just so make sure that everybody knows what they're doing. So if you see on here, I've got our Q focus, asking questions, single most important thing. Up here at the top are the different pages. So if you go to the right, this is page 2 of 7. It has the same thing, page 3 of 7, 4 of 7. There's actually 6 in here, but a lot of times it'll just, if you keep clicking, it'll just keep adding another page, another page, another page. So only use the slides that have the information already on there. So yeah, you can kind of go through all of them. And then once you are into this, there's several tools that are over here. A couple that are really useful. You have a text box that you could use, and that your group can kind of determine which one you want to use. In this case, I think it might be okay, since we're going to do it in a much more shortened time period than normal, is that you could actually grab a sticky note and then type your thoughts. No, we're not going to type thoughts. Type your questions onto a sticky note. And once you save it, it's going to pop it on there. And then you can sort of move it around and manipulate it on the slide. So we could probably do that and have each person in the group add their questions really quickly. Normally you would have a scribe, and then you would also have a spokesperson. That would be 2 different people. Your student groups, you want to have around 3 to 5 students in each group, and reminding them, make sure that they're following those rules, putting the questions as they've been stated, restate everything as a question, put all the questions down. And then once everything is all done, you would have students that have made a list, they're gonna number the questions. So 1 through, 30, 40, 50, however many that they get. Okay, so as I said, I am going to send you all out to breakout rooms here in just a minute. There'll be 6 breakout rooms. So it looks like we'll have about 6 people in each room, which will be just fine. And you'll be out there for a couple of minutes. And the questions that you are going to be, that you're going to be writing are going to have to do with this. So you are asking questions about this focus statement. Okay, so let's see if we can't get breakout rooms. I'm new to the breakout rooms, so hopefully they're gonna work. I've never used them. We don't use Zoom. We've used Google Meet. So, all right, so I think that I've got it the way that I'm supposed to. So fingers crossed that you all will go out into the breakout room, and I'll see you back here in about 4 minutes.
Stop, and I'm unmuted.
You're doing a great job, Kimberly. I'm not leaving because of this, but I have another meeting I have to go to at 7. So,
Gotcha. Well, thank you. I appreciate it.
so have a good evening and good luck with the rest of the session.
Thanks. You too. Good to see you.
Good to see you too.
So for anybody watching the recording, I am actually going to go out to the Jamboard, and we're going to kind of creep these Jamboards a little bit. Hopefully people will start popping up some information on here really soon. All right, this one looks pretty good. It looks like they've got a lot of questions on here already. Why do they all have to be questions? Can I fill my water bottle? That sounds like a question you would get from a student. Can I go to the bathroom? So in this case, in the classroom, you would break your students up physically into groups and then just sort of filter around, either use a stopwatch or use a timer on your projector. You can even just use the clock. There's no, it doesn't necessarily have to be any specific amount of time. Usually you want to do about 5 minutes. You can shorten it up after students are well versed in it because they'll figure it out and they can do it much more quickly. Check out another board here. Prior knowledge. Where can I find the answers to my questions? So some of these, this would be if you were going around the classroom and you see that they wrote down passion for learning, you would say, okay, well, that one's not phrased as a question. So you need to rewrite it and put it into a question. And oh my gosh, this person must like hear me through the Zoom, have figured out this, what is passion for learning? So we've got a few people putting some questions up on some of the other boards. This one's got quite a few. And you will notice that with groups of students that some groups will generate many, many, many more questions than other groups. You just sort of have to encourage them. It doesn't necessarily hurt to maybe the first few times to offer some kind of incentive for the group that writes the most questions, as long as their questions are relevant to whatever the Q focus is. And that's really important, is that you make sure that their questions are relevant, you know, so that they can't just throw out random things like, can I go to the bathroom? Can I fill my water bottle, etc. Oh, now this group is very nicely organized into a little grid pattern. Beautiful. Okay, so I'm actually going to go back. And we'll start bringing our participants back. Okay, well, as we are welcoming everyone back from our breakout rooms, I went over and kind of creeped what all of you were doing over on the Jamboard, and it looked like there were some great questions being generated over there. So at this point, if you were doing it with your students, while they are generating their questions, you just sort of want to circulate around the room, kind of reminding them of the rules if necessary, encouraging them to come up with as many more questions as they can. Sometimes I would offer an incentive for the groups, whoever can come up with the most questions that are relevant to the Q focus, you get some kind of a little prize or something, just to sort of put a little bit of competition in there, because we know kids like to be the winner. So if we can get them to kind of move forward on that. So then that would take us on to step 4. And in step 4, we're going to categorize our questions. And there are a couple of things that you would do for that. First off, you need to determine if the questions are closed-ended or open-ended. So a closed-ended question is going to be something that can be answered pretty simply with either a yes or no answer, a single word answer, or a very, very brief answer of some sort. So it could be a name of a person or a group. It could be the name of a place. It could be a time period, so like a year or a specific date. The open-ended questions are going to be something that requires a much more complex answer, a more of a longer drawn out answer. And so your open-ended questions a lot of times are going to begin with a why or a how. Closed-ended questions are going to be is, do, or can. And then they could both be who, what, when, or where questions. That's when it gets a little bit more difficult, where students really have to think about what the answer is going to be. And so you would then have them go through their list of questions and categorize them as either C for closed or O for open. And then also challenge them to practice switching over from one type of question to the other type of questions. So if they have a very simple yes or no question, for example, I saw someone wrote one of the questions, it said, can I fill my water bottle? That would be obviously a closed-ended question. It's going to be yes or no. Can you change that into an open-ended question? Would be, I don't know, that's going to be a tough one because that really,
That was my dumb question. When would be a good time for me to do that?
Yeah, totally okay though, because those are some of the questions that you're going to get from kids, right? Is, can I fill my water bottle? Can I use a bathroom? So you kind of have to coach them a little bit at the beginning that their questions need to be relevant to the Q focus. Then you can also lead them through a discussion of the advantage and disadvantages of both of those types of questions. Obviously, the closed-ended questions, and advantage of them is it has a concrete answer. Unfortunately for us in social studies, a lot of times things are not concrete answers. I always say, sometimes I wish I taught math, because in math, 2 + 2 is always 4. In social studies, the answer is a little bit more in the gray area. It's kind of squishy as an answer. So yeah, you would want to lead them through kind of a discussion of those advantages and disadvantages. So I'm actually going to very briefly send you back out to those breakouts, have you go back out to that Jamboard and go through and kind of categorize those questions into whether you think that they're open or closed. Just to, like I said, give you the practice in doing it. And we're going to go back into this for just very, very briefly, maybe like 2 minutes. So go back into your questions and put a C or an O. I'll open up the rooms again.
Could I get the access to the breakout? I mean, to the the board?
Yep, just a second.
Yeah, I had to switch devices.
Okay, I put it back in the chat.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Let's see.
So I will pop out here again for our folks watching it later and look at one of these Jamboards. Oh, that was a great way to do it. They just split theirs up. They put an open and a closed and then just sort of move them around. I've never used Jamboard for this, but I think it would lend itself so well to this particular thing to do. This group did it as well. They just sort of split it, put open and closed, and then just move them around. I think that's great. Absolutely a great way to do it. So actually going to close those out and bring them back. Okay, it looks like we have everyone back. I went over and I saw what a few of the groups did, which I thought was fantastic. I've never actually used Jamboard with this process, and I think it lends itself to it really well. I saw that quite a few of the groups just either drew a line down the center, or they moved their closed-ended to one side, their open-ended to the other side. When you do it on paper, obviously you can't really do that, but I think maybe this would be a good way to do it. Even, maybe even with kids face to face, let them do that. The novelty of Jamboard, if you've never used it before, definitely would get them involved and interested. All right, so this will take us to step 5. And finally at step 5, you are going to get a little bit of better information, better understanding of, okay, you've taught us this whole process, but we still don't really know what we're doing with it. Step 5 is where you're really going to do something with this information. So you're gonna have your students prioritize their questions and share their questions out. So there's some different criteria that you can use, and really to determine which of these you want the students to use as their prioritizing tool. It's really going to depend on what they're going to do with that information and the answers to those questions as you move forward. So if they're going to use that information just sort of in an introduction to a topic, then maybe you might want those most interesting or most important questions. Are they going to use it to write a research paper? Then which of them really are like kind of those burning questions that they need to know? Are you having them do something civic action related? Then you might want which questions are going to be the best for solving a problem. If they are going to be designing something, which of these do you need to know first to help you answer some of the other questions? So you have multiple different functions that you can do with their answers to the question. So based on what you're going to have, so like I said before, you sort of have to reverse engineer the QFT a little bit, because you need to know where you want them to be going so that you can kind of help them build that roadmap to get there. Once you have the criteria and you tell them the criteria, as a group, they're going to need to come to a consensus of what are their top 3 questions based on whatever criteria. So if it is most interesting, for example, they would have to agree, these are the 3 most interesting questions that we asked, or the 3 that we think are going to have the most interesting answers. It is really, and it's amazing how kind of the give and take, that's really the fun part. This is a part that takes a pretty good chunk of time in the classroom with students, especially at the beginning, sometimes especially once they've done it for a while, because they feel like they really have a good understanding, and they're going to fight for that question that they asked or that their friend asked that they think is just the greatest question, that maybe the rest of the group isn't really kind of keen on that question. They also need to pay attention to where on the list those questions were when they asked them. It just kind of gives them a better understanding of where in your thought process are you coming up with the best questions. And they may start to see a trend. If they're working with the same groups of people all the time, they might see that trend develop, that they ask their really good questions right at the beginning. Or they might find out that they ask their best questions after they've had a little bit more time to think about it and ask some other questions to lead them to it. If you mix up the groups, then that's a fun little experiment as well, because you can really get some different dynamics of a kid that asks really good questions at the beginning and a kid that is more thoughtful and asks a really good question sort of at the end. So once you have, they've completed this step and they've determined what their three top questions are for whatever reason. Oh, I'm sorry, I went the wrong way. Then you're going to have students share out. And you can have them share out multiple things. You're definitely going to have them share out their priority questions. But you could even have them pick out one of their closed-ended questions that they rephrased into an open-ended, or an open-ended one that they rephrased into a closed-ended, just to sort of see where their thinking is. They can kind of make their thinking a little bit more visual for their classmates. When they share out their 3 priority questions, they also should share why they chose them. And that might involve sharing a question that they maybe battled about within their group, that some of the group members wanted, but they eventually discarded in favor of another question. And then also where those questions were on their list. So this is where having their questions numbered is going to be really important. So that you know, so that they can sort of see, compared to their peers, compared to the other groups, where did these important questions fall in their list? Is the entire class in the same place? Or are different groups kind of having some different abilities at asking the questions? They ask the good ones first, for example. So then that takes us to the next steps. And so from here, you know, student groups are going to have these whole lists of questions, and then what are they going to do with this information? And you might not have shared that with them until now. So they've asked all their questions, they've categorized them, they've prioritized them. Now you're going to tell them, okay, you're going to take your top 3 questions and you're going to find the answers, and then you're going to use that to do X, Y, Z. So this is where you would give them their purpose for doing all of this. They might use those questions for an individual project. They could use it for a group project. They could use it to write a research paper or an opinion essay. You can use it in other subject areas. I know we're here for social studies, but some of you may teach other subject areas. You could use it to come up with ideas for an experiment or research. They could use it to develop their ideas for a presentation, maybe questions for an interview with someone. It's great way to lead into getting information to have a debate over a controversial topic within your classroom. I've used it in my civic classroom for that purpose. And it makes for a much more robust amount of research that students have about different topics, especially for something like a debate or a discussion, because they have all of these varied ideas about the topic. So very, very many things that you can do with that. And then that takes us to the final step of the process, which is reflection. They can do this individually, they can do it within their groups. You could do a whole class discussion on it, and ask them, you know, a variety of questions, including what did you learn? And it isn't just what did you learn about the topic, but what did you learn about yourself as a questioner? What did you learn about yourself as a learner? How can you use what you learned in all of this process? What is the value of learning to ask your own questions? That's a great one at the beginning, because you might have students sort of confused at the beginning about why are we doing this? I don't understand. Like, why don't you just tell us what we need to know? It's this whole idea of why don't you just tell us the answers? And I want to tell you the answers. I want you to come up with the questions and then you to find out the answers. How do you feel about asking questions? What did you like about this process? So, you know, you can come up with additional questions for that on how you're going to have your students reflect on what they're doing. So this is where we'll circle back to how you choose your Q focus. It takes time to come up with one because there are certain things that you want to make sure that are and are not included in it. It should be very brief. It should be a statement. It should be no longer than a sentence, shorter than a sentence if possible. You know, really starting out the shorter, probably the better. It cannot be a question. It has to be a statement, and it has to be a very clear statement that doesn't reveal teacher preference or bias, but that has a definite point of view. And you should try to make it so that it stimulates new lines of thinking of your students. So me putting this Q focus as, you know, it being the most essential, the single most essential skill, that's thought provoking for a teacher, because we want to know the single most important skill of learning, because if we know that, we can tap into that and become the greatest teacher ever. So you want it to be something thought provoking. You maybe want it to be something a little bit controversial. You don't want it to be super controversial, because then students are going to get maybe too caught up in emotion about their opinion on the topic. So, but your students as well. So, you can kind of direct that or gear that toward what you think your students would best be able to handle. So this is my any questions slide. I'm going to skip over it for just a quick little second, and then we'll come back and have some time for questions. So I had my spiel in my previous session. So if you were here for that one, I'm sorry. You're going to have to listen to it again really quickly. I just want to throw a little promo out there for the James Madison Fellowship. You could potentially qualify for up to $24,000 for a master's degree on the study of the Constitution. So if you are an American history teacher, or you are a civics teacher looking to get a master's degree for free, this is a great way to do that. You can study at any accredited college or university in the US. They will also bring you to Washington, D.C. for 4 weeks in the summer, where you will study at Georgetown University with 4 of the most preeminent constitutional scholars in the country. Once you are finished, you have to teach for 1 full year of each year that they have given you funding. So it takes you 3 years to get your master's degree. You have to teach for 3 more years after you get your degree. You would only compete against applicants within your state. So it wouldn't be like you against everybody in America. It would just be you against people right here in Michigan. Applications are due super soon, though. They're due on the 1st of March. Unfortunately, this presentation was like really, really close to that. But it's the 1st of March every year. So if it didn't work out for you for this year, obviously, you could try again for next year. If people have questions about this, I would love to answer your questions. I was the James Madison Fellow from Michigan in 2011. I went to Georgetown in 2012. And really, I will tell people it was the greatest professional development experience of my career. I learned more during that summer at Georgetown than I could ever learn about the Constitution, for sure. So yeah, other than that, if anyone has any questions, we've got about 10 minutes left that I could take questions. If you think of questions later, you can absolutely get me at Mrs. Riggs or kwrigglesworth@oacsd.com. You can also find more information at rightquestion.org. That is the organization that came up with this. And there is also a book that is about this entire process. That takes you through, is much, much more in depth. Obviously, there's only so much that I can do in a 1 hour or a 40-minute presentation to get the information out there to you about that. So,
Kimberly, I have a question.
sure.
So, okay, because I was taking notes. Like, actually, I took a lot of notes. But you talked about, so you go from, in step 4, categorizing questions,
Yep.
and then in step 5 to prioritizing questions. And I assumed with prioritizing, like that was where but where, at what point do you number your questions?
They should actually be numbering them as they're writing them.
Okay.
So that's going to be all the way back in step 3.
Step 3.
Yeah. So that's where doing it on paper would help. We did this here a little bit differently because each person was writing their own questions. If you were doing this with students, you would not do it that way. You would have one person be the scribe or the recorder. And so as they are writing the questions, it's really nice to use like a shared Google Doc for that, and put it where it automatically numbers. So every time they hit enter, it'll put the next number there. So they'll start out with number 1, enter, and number 2 will pop right up for them, and they don't even really have to think about it as they go through and write.
Okay. Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
I also had a question. You were talking about the Q focus. being a statement and not a question. Could the cue focus, instead of being a statement, be something like a picture or a video?
Yes, absolutely it could. I've seen people use images. I've seen them. I don't think I've ever seen anyone use a video, but I think that would be really cool if you had if you had a really good video that would provide them with some thought. But yeah, I've even seen I've seen people that have used this in mathematics classrooms, use geometrical figures or graphs, charts without any information on them is another good image that you could use. So yes, it can't be a question, but it could be some other things. Could be an audio recording.
Thanks.
Okay, I have a general question for you.
Sure.
I've taught online for a couple of years now, and something I've always struggled with and seems pretty common that other people are struggling with this year is just getting students to engage with these in class in general. Is there anything that you kind of do to set people up with creating the atmosphere where you do get that participation online, where they do feel comfortable asking those questions?
I wish that I had the magic bullet for you.
Oh, there is no magic bullet. I know that. I always look for other ideas, though.
I wish I had a magic snowball.
Yes. Oh my gosh, yes.
That is such a tough thing. We're face to face. We've been face to face all year this year, except for the mandatory high school shutdown there, and then we actually had a community community spread shutdown. And yeah, trying to get kids to participate online and to actually ask questions like that is worse than pulling teeth. I think that if you had a good, maybe already had a good foundation with this, which if you're teaching only online, that's going to be really tough. I had some luck with this last spring just because my students were we had done it enough that when I threw it out there and I told them, I said, okay, we're going to do this. They participated in it pretty well, but it's just, you've got to build that. You kind of have to build the trust with the students. You have to build the trust amongst the students, which sometimes is really difficult. It sort of is one of those things that if you can really hook on to our great cue focus, and honestly, starting with a cue focus that isn't necessarily related to your subject, but is just something that will really catch their attention.
Yeah, I kind of saw this as even helping out with even just like icebreaker activities, beginning of the year type of stuff, that sort of thing, to build that up and expectations.
Yeah, I've always thought it could sort of be related to those, is a hot dog a sandwich question. Something like that.
That might be too controversial.
Right. And you could easily do that by saying a hot dog is a sandwich and then let them go ahead with their questions.
Gotcha.
That's anarchy and I love it.
No, I love the presentation. Lots of good information, lots of different approaches.
Thank you.
I can definitely see how you can apply these to the essential questions or the I can type things you already have in a classroom. So thank you.
All right, well, we are about to be kicked out of this Zoom room in about 30 seconds, it looks like. So,
quick question. Did you say this presentation is available or just on the recording?
I didn't have the link to it. I made a link.
10 seconds, go.
Oh, I don't know what I did with the link. I had it.
You can post it on the main webpage too for the
Yeah,
conference.
I'll go back. I'll go back and I'll post it in there so that
You can add files and everything. So
Great, thank you.
You're welcome. Have a great night, everyone. Thanks so much.
Thank you.